and let's do it.
All right, awesome. So, Michelle, Angela, or Tony, do you want to open up with anything today?
Well, I want to thank Glenda for coming back and continue with the series. We really do appreciate it. And again, each session will be more important or maybe have more meaning for some people and maybe a little less for others, but you will without doubt learn something that if you don't use it now, you will use it later for sure. So and it's all really important information and so worthwhile. So I'm just so glad that Glenda's doing this for us. So I'll hand it off to you, Glenda. Take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Tony. I appreciate the opening, and I am excited to be with you all again today. This is session number 4 for us in our series of 6, and I'm going to share my screen and queue up my slide deck. All right, so I think we're where I want us to be. Let me just open up my images of everyone so I can try to multitask and see who might have a comment, but I'll lean on my team to let me know if there's something in the chat or someone has a raised hand that I might not acknowledge or see in the moment. But welcome, everyone. I want to start off with a little bit of a recap and reflections. Of course, we're on this journey to look at things within your organization that you might not ordinarily focus on or think about that could turn into a larger situation than you would like it to be. There is a lot of comfort that comes, surprisingly, that comes with kind of putting out fires as they occur. There's a lot of necessity that comes with putting them out as they occur versus being intentional and planning for things to happen in a more structured way, just because you don't have the time a lot of times to do that. And so what we're hopeful about occurring in this series is that you'll take the time that we spend together here to really extend your mind and shift your thinking and maybe get a little more granular at looking at things within your organization from a process perspective, procedure, documentation, relationship, communication, understanding, just a myriad of different ways, as well as through the lens of different stakeholders, whether it's from the perspective of the board of directors or the chief executive, the project director, the employees, the families you serve, others in the community that rely on you for resources and information. Just thinking about them as being impacted and affected by these events that occur that we're looking at through the lens of a fire scenario and looking at them as causes that we want to put on a short list of things that you might want to take back and consider. These are the top 3 areas that I want to work on, and these are some action items that I'm going to take, and these are some tools and resources that have been shared throughout the series that may be of benefit to you, to me, to get started within your organizations. So that's our overarching goal, is to help you look at these things in a different way and to share experiences that you've had with these things and how they've turned out, what you might have employed to help you get through it. And some of them may be extreme. They may be things, as Tony just said, you haven't encountered yet. So they might not make a lot of sense because you haven't dealt with it. But it's something that's going to reside in your memory in one of your storehouses until the occasion occurs. And then you'll have an opportunity to reflect back on this series, on the notes that you've taken along the way, or people that you know made a comment about something that you can now reach out to and enlist their support. And most definitely the TA Center with Michelle and her team, reaching out to them and having them help you. So I don't know if each of you was here last time, but if you were and you remember some of the things we talked about, we were focused on the perspective from the board of directors And several of you shared things in the chat or verbally that you have going on at your organization. So if you have a recollection about that, that kind of struck you that you might want to share right now, you can come off mute and do that. Or if from an earlier session that you just didn't get an opportunity to verbalize before, but you want to highlight it right now, please feel free to do that and just comment on either a takeaway, a question that was sparked for you, an aha moment that you had in general, or something that was specific to the conversations we had on last session. So I'll just give you a minute or so to kind of think about that and see if there's anyone in the group that wants to share any observation or note that you took up to this point in the series. And feel free to drop something in the chat. If you'd rather not verbalize, you can put something in the chat and that'll be there for everyone to view and save at the end if they want to save the chat. All right, then, well, let's move on to our first slide. Well, so I want to take us back to our very first session. Some of you may recall this slide from the opening, what I call the mission critical hub. You have the parent center in the middle, and you have all these things happening around it that are impacting your operations. And today we're going to be focused on the program service area here on the bottom left in terms of the projects, the project, the main program service delivery or the project that you have going on, keeping in mind that, you know, I don't know each of you personally, and I don't remember from session to session which of you have identified as the CEO of your organization, the executive director, or the project director. So I do know we have a mix of both. And so we focused on the chief executive's perspective in a prior session as well. And today we're going to focus more on the programmatic side of things. But in looking at the program, all of these other things affect it. You're looking to donors for resources to keep your programs going. And this has been a constant theme throughout our sessions about diversifying your funding. And I'll speak a little bit more about that today. But we're hoping that one of the results of this process is that you'll begin to think this way, or you'll expand and intensify and strengthen your thinking in this area, if you're already doing it, about other sources of funding and not being heavily OSEP reliant. And I know some of you shared before that has been a perspective of some of the folks in your organization that, oh, we've got this grant, we're good. And looking at things only through the lens of OSEP and not so much the broader nonprofit lens of your entire agency. Of course, finance is playing a role. They're purchasing the items that you need. They're accounting for them to give back those reports and accountability. So you're working, hopefully, in close proximity with the finance department, the accounting department, to ensure that they have accurate information as they do their periodic accountability reports to external stakeholders, but also internally to the board. Employees, of course, are driving everything, delivering the program services, whether you operate a hotline or a call center, or you're doing the information dissemination or the training sessions for parents, attending community events and collaboration events that your organization is a part of. Employees are key to that process, as are volunteers, which I have on the other end of the spectrum, because a lot of volunteers are necessary to get things accomplished, whether it's at the program level or the administrative level. Then you have, the watchdogs that I have here as the regulators. Of course, the families that you're serving, any legislators that you're meeting with from an advocacy standpoint, the schools and health providers, and a litany of others that I don't have here, but more external folks to the entity. Vendors, of course, you're getting your materials and supplies from, and the board of directors who are steering the whole vision at the top, ensuring that through all of this, you're maintaining that compliance with your mission, and if you have one, your vision statement. So just wanted to remind you of the interdependency of all of these departments. Again, hoping to expand your perspective around how you are identifying areas that could present themselves as a possible issue, a fire within the organization. So that was a quick overview and kind of a reminder, because that's going to take us into today's conversation as well. So I'm taking this from a little bit different perspective. Typically, we've dived right into the causes and the injured by looking at the list, and we've had more of a roundtable discussion. And what I want to do first is present a little bit of content, which is what I'm doing now, and then that will tee up the discussion that we'll have when we look at the causes and the injured specifically. And in all likelihood, we will have touched on many of them just as a function of this approach here. And this approach that I'm using is from a departmental assessment perspective, if you will. I'm sure all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the different, and also employ different assessments within your services. It could be a board assessment to see how well they're performing and upholding their roles and responsibilities. It's obviously assessments of individuals in the form of evaluations. We've talked about that at the chief executive level, whether they're occurring or not. Some of you put in chat comments in 2 sessions prior, I think, things around how whether your executive has been, or you personally have been evaluated on a regularly scheduled process, ideally annually. But also programmatic assessments. You're doing those for the benefit of your funders, but hopefully also internally for your own benefit, to see how well you're delivering those services and effectively and efficiently. But then there's the organizational-wide assessment, where when you're getting ready for a new chief executive, ideally you're going to go through an organizational assessment to see what things you want to get in place and shore up before the new executive comes in, so that they're not walking into some things that have not been able to be achieved under the prior leadership, notwithstanding the things that were achieved, but things that have now become the new priorities for the new incoming person. So there's a time in your life cycle when you'll perform organizational assessments. So with that in mind, I thought, well, let me take it to another level, and let's think about it from a departmental perspective. And this, of course, could be conducted through any of your departments with the finance function. And I use department loosely because, depending on the size of your organization, you could have a department of 1, or a person that's responsible for a couple of departments because of the nature of your structure. But looking at every function, if we were to go back to this hub, you could look at doing or conducting a departmental assessment from various perspectives here. And so we're going to do it from the programmatic side. And I'm starting with this term strategic plan, because I worked with an organization to create a strategic plan at the departmental level. And it was a major project for them. It was an offsite retreat, and it was very involved, an all-day affair, and it had some follow-up components to it. But I'm thinking about this in the context of a given area. So if you think about just the programmatic area, ask yourselves, do you have a plan for just that area? What is the plan for that group? So in this context for today, what is the strategic plan for the programmatic area, the program service, the project director? And how does that plan align with the agency's strategic plan? First and foremost, they need to be in alignment. You don't want to go left while the organization is going right. So it must be in alignment. But what I'm talking about here is a vision for your department. How do you define success within your own department? What are the key areas that you want to focus on for your department to be able to say, we're performing at an excellent level. We're meeting our mission. Because in the area of the program services, the project itself, the PTI, you already have deliverables because of the grant source, and you're meeting those by virtue of the agency's mission. So that's why I don't have mission statement on here, because by default, your mission statement really is that of the agency. What I'm talking about here is a vision statement. Have you decided that for this area, we have set goals for ourselves that we want to achieve, or we're measuring ourselves against, to make sure that we're performing at a high level, we're performing at excellence, and of course, we're performing in compliance with whatever we've committed to do. So this is a way of compartmentalizing each area, excuse me, each area, but within the broader umbrella of the entire agency, so that you're all functioning synergistically and not going off on your own direction. But at the same time, you are recognizing that you are your own function, and there's certain things that you want to see happen there. So if we step down another level, a way of accomplishing that is through a SWOT analysis, just like you would do with the overall agency. And some of you mentioned that you were in the midst of creating a strategic plan, or that you had a plan, but it was outdated and it needed to be refreshed, or that you didn't have one at all. And so borrowing that acronym, it could apply to this area today, or even the other areas we've already addressed. And that is, what are your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats? And for us today, I highlighted 4 key areas that you might choose to focus on, because a lot of times, if you don't narrow the scope, then especially if you're put on the spot, you'll think, I can't really think of anything. Nothing's coming to mind. This is a big ask. So I'm trying to give a little bit of direction and focus to maybe target your thoughts. And the one thing that came to mind for sure was communications. And that's because we've talked about this in prior sessions. And in fact, after the 3rd session, one of the tools that I sent for the toolkit, the shared box that you have access to, were some things around creating a stronger communication between the chief executive and the board, or the board chair and the chief executive. Someone else shared in a prior session how they regularly attend board meetings. And so they're creating a relationship with board members as a consequence of that. But others of you don't have much interaction from the programmatic side with the board. I think someone shared that all of the management leaders attend the board meetings. And so it just looks different for each group. I do recall someone shared that it's difficult to get board members to respond when you reach out to them for things that you need them to do. So that comes back to the communication. How intentional are you around communicating? What methods are you using? Do you know that that's an effective method for that particular individual that you're communicating with? How often do you, as the project director, communicate or meet with your chief executive on matters that are particular to the projects and the programs that you're running? So I threw that one up there. Training was the second one I thought of. Again, just through this series, we're taking this opportunity to orient and train various ones of you around the broader perspective of nonprofit management, and to break down some of the silos that can exist within an organization when we get so focused on the one functional area that we're responsible for. So as a consequence, you might find that you don't feel like you receive enough training in other areas that are beyond the scope that you're primarily focused on. Because again, if you go back to that hub, that original slide, if everything is interdependent on one another, then it's to your benefit to have some perspective about what those areas entail. So if finance is not your strength, but finance is impacting everything you do in some way, then you might be interested in attending some financial training on some level. Process and procedures, another big component to this series. The leadership team and I have talked about the desire to have you drill down and look at which things exist as a formal process or a formal procedure. How much do you have in writing? This was part of the opening slide in our first session where I shared the must-have documents, the inverted triangle, where you see you start with the articles of incorporation and it drills all the way down to the specific how-to steps. And so this is where, we want you to really think about literally how do we perform every single function, and is that the most effective, efficient? Is it user driven? How much are you reaching out to either families that are served, volunteers that are doing some of the work for you, or employees who are leading the effort to ask their opinion around what are they seeing? What could we do differently? What could we do better? And then the last one is resource diversification, which has been an overarching theme to this series as well, which is moving away from a single source of revenue or a high dependency on one or two sources of revenue, and really starting to think about how else could we secure resources. I recall one person sharing they had, I think, 13 or 14 different funding sources. So clearly they've garnered some expertise in the area of resource diversification, and that might be a point of leverage for you if you aren't that diversified. So this is what I want you to kind of think about, and this is the approach we'll take today as we lead into the list of causes and injured that was provided at the outset. I just want to share one template around resource diversification, and then we'll go into that SWOT exercise. And we'll do that collectively as a group, and we'll talk about and share some of the things you post, and then we'll move into our list. But this is a sample resource diversification template. There's numerous out there that you could choose from. And this is kind of a mashup of a couple of different things, but I didn't want to have a whole bunch of slides. So I've tried to put them all into one. And what I've done here is taken just one program, and you have to define what your programs are. And if you're being audited, if your financial statements are audited, then you've already done this exercise because you have to report your operations from a programmatic perspective, and you're audited from a programmatic perspective. But just taking a particular program, listing out your revenues by source. If you have federal grants, then you'd list each grant. State grants, list each grant, subtotal. What I've done here, I've just listed the OSEP grant, and then, no name for state grants, but I have placeholders for two. You might have a couple of foundation grants, you'd subtotal those. You might have individual donations that come into the agency. You may host special events. You might do a gala event once a year, or a golf event, or other types of events where you're involving the board, perhaps with fundraising. And then you have your total revenues. And of course, you'd have all of your expenses listed. But again, for brevity purposes, I just put total expenses. And the difference, of course, between total revenue and expenses is your surplus or deficit. You could do this analysis from a budget perspective, but also from actuals. You could do a budget versus actual analysis. All of these things are different analytical procedures you can take to get a sense of how is your program funded and how is it doing. Likelihood is a column where you would indicate the likelihood of receiving the funds that you have here if this were a budget versus actual. So if you're budgeting a particular state grant, you want to have a sense of the likelihood that you'll receive that grant. Is it a high percentage, a moderate percentage, or a low percentage? So you could use HML as your code. Is it 100% certain you're getting it? Is it a 50% probability? Is it 10% because this is a stretch source of funding that you're trying to procure? Put that indicator in there so that you know how your budget is going to develop. The percentage column is where you're indicating how diversified you are. So this is where you do the math to say OSEP is $1,000 over our total revenue. So you're doing the percentage of this one type of revenue over your total revenue. And then in this single column, at a glance, you can see that 100% of your budget is coming from OSEP, or 50% of your budget comes from OSEP, and then 25 is from state grants in total. That's why I have a subtotal, or 25% is from this one state grant. And then the other 25% might be sprinkled throughout these other funding sources. So being able to calculate that percentage gives you an idea of how heavily concentrated you are in any source of funding. And typically you think of finance doing this exercise, but the program side is also should be intimately familiar with this analysis and communicating with finance so that you can see where your shortcomings are. If you know what your expenses are, which you have itemized, and those expenses relate back to your strategic plan because they're defining where you're going in the future. You have this vision of expanding into other communities, expanding into more diverse communities that are served, expanding the services themselves because you're determining from feedback that you need to add some additional services that are within the scope of what your mission is. You can begin to see where your shortcomings are. And then your goal column would be, what do you want that percentage to be? So if OSEP is at 100, maybe you set a goal that by the end of the following year or by the end of this 5-year OSEP grant cycle, that 100 will be down to 80. And so it gives you an opportunity to begin planning so that if OSEP gets cut dramatically, you already have other sources that are picking up that slack well before that defunding occurs. So this is one tool that is helpful to get a perspective around why are we fundraising? How do we fundraise? What sources are we going after? Where do we not have any funding coming in from that we would like to intentionally build from and create a fundraising plan around, which is one of the tools that was previously provided. So this is one way of getting a handle on just this one program. And then you would do the same thing for your other programs. And at that point, you're able to start being intentional around this strategic plan that you have for the entire program division or department, if you will. So I'm going to pause here, see what kind of questions or observations you have. But this was my content for the day to give you a different way of expanding your mindset around what our goal is with this series. And then as we move into the activity, you have a sense of what you might consider as a strength from a program perspective, a weakness, an area for improvement, an opportunity that you can exploit and leverage to either garner more resources, garner more employees, expand your programming, and what might be a threat, which is kind of the foundation to all of this. We're calling them fires, causes. What might be a threat that you had not considered before, that if you looked at it through these lenses, it's something you would add to that threat column. So let me pause for a moment and see if there's anything in the chat or if anyone wants to come off mute and share your thoughts around this concept that I've presented, or any questions you have around that. Does it make sense? Does this align with some things you're already doing? Okay. Oops, sorry, skipped forward.
I really like that the budget through like each specific program. And so that allows us to really, I don't know, even just get that experience of working through budgets and understanding how it all works before you even get in a different position. So I really like seeing this laid out, and like now going back to Michelle and our one-on-ones, like, hey, can we sit down and look at this? And this is something that we've kind of already started doing, but really having this written down, even to share with staff, like, what does this look like long-term? Like, what else should we be thinking about so that it's not just in Michelle's realm to focus on, like, the budget affects all of us. And if we don't get it, we don't have jobs. So everyone needs to buy into this and understand what it looks like and how it plays out. So I really like this.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. And then someone else responded, it aligns with what you're doing. Awesome, thank you. All right.
Really
So, oh, yes, I hear a voice.
Yeah, sorry, Glenda, it's Angela. I was just gonna say, I really like to look at it this way, sort of breaking out that resource diversification, because I think it's really helpful not only to look at it, you know, I know all this stuff in my head, it runs around in my iCloud on all of our, you know, what we have. But like Sherelle just said, when you put this in front of programmatic staff and the board, you can really paint a better picture of where we're maybe needing to shore up in a different way. So I was watching this and I was thinking about some of those funding sources that really aren't a good funding source for us. So they are because they're collaborative, they build relationships, but they really don't give me anybody that I don't. I mean, there's very little administrative. Like at one point I had a solid pass through $40,000 grant from our state Department of Ed that had no overhead, no administrative, no time, nothing. It was just pure pass through, scholarships for parents, paying for our part of our conference. Those are good things, but we have to be looking at them from, okay, but somebody's got to do the work, right? So I'm looking at some of this in those terms. And then also when people want us to do something or give us a very small amount of money to do something, how I can much easier be able to say, you know what, if this doesn't fund an actual human, I can't say yes to it. If it's only $5,000 and there's deliverables that have to happen and it's not just unrestricted funds that I can juice any way I want to, then I got to be able to say no. So I just like the way this is laid out. So thanks for that.
Awesome. I love that. You hit on a lot of important points. So thank you for sharing that. Let's see, one more item in the chat. I think it also helps programmatic staff think about managing the program in a broader perspective as well. Yes, thank you, Jill. Absolutely. So this takes us to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we're going to take a couple minutes here, and individually, I want you to think about from the programmatic perspective, the project director's office perspective, what are some strengths that are happening right now that you'd like to call out and place in the strengths column? And then what are some things that you know need to be improved in that area at any level? It doesn't matter what it is. We're just kind of throwing things up there and spitballing, if you will, just to get them up there and then come back and look at them at a later time and see what can we do with it or about it. What opportunities might exist that you've maybe come across or heard someone else say, or you just didn't have the time to address it, but you want to throw it up here and think on it, you know, at the back end of our series. And then what are some exposures, some threats, some issues that are out there that could turn out negatively? So we'll see if this works. And if not, we have a backup plan. You should have annotate in your menu. If it's not showing in your Zoom menu, it might be under more. If you click on more, it may say annotate. And if you click on that, then you should see another icon that allows you to click the T, which is to type words. And when you click on the T, then you can start typing in its own box what item you want to list. And so you can type directly on your screen here and drag it to the correct column. So yes, I see Maria has figured out the feature, and you can just begin typing and then drag it over to the strengths column. You don't have to have one per line. Wherever yours fits in, you can adjust your box that you type in and make it smaller once you've finished if it's too wide and you didn't need all that space. And just start throwing things up here into one of the 4 columns. If you don't have that functionality, if you don't see it, if it's not cooperating today, go ahead and type it in the chat, because I want to be able to call out some of these and maybe ask one of you to share a little bit more about what that represents. But before you type it in the chat, please code it. So if you're typing a strength, type an S, a dash, and then type whatever the strength is. If it's a weakness, a W, a dash, and then whatever the weakness. Opportunities, an O, and threats, a T. And that'll just make it easier for all of us to know that you're sharing a strength versus an opportunity versus a weakness versus a threat. So you have your choice to type directly on the screen or in the chat box. And then I will capture the screen by saving it. And of course, we'll be saving the chat as well. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. And then we'll look at those as well as the ones that were provided in the pre-read material at the beginning of the series, and just kind of talk about what those dynamics are at your centers. And if you type something that you don't want there, there is an undo function, like the traditional undo. There you go. Or you can leave it there and we can work around it. So. And we'll take about 5 minutes to do this. So to give you a sense of how much time we're going to spend on it.
So Glenda, if there were things there before and then they went away, is that because somebody chose to take them on or off?
Yes, I'm hoping it's the person that actually typed it there.
Okay.
They'll remember what they had.
Okay,
But
because I
yes.
saw some good things there and I was like, yes, where'd they go?
Yes, yes. It looks like they're moving them to
Okay.
maybe the chat box. But I also actually I like that they did it on the screen as well, because
Yeah.
that gives us more space to type. If you've labeled it, then you could theoretically put it anywhere on this
Okay.
screen. So yeah, thank you.
How do you move it once you've typed it?
You can click on the box. Let me go back in here. So if you click on what you typed, if at the top of your menu, there should be a plus sign, and that gives you the cursor, so to speak, the select. And then when you've got that versus having the writing function, then you can click back on what you wrote, and it'll allow you to move the whole unit.
Oh,
So on my menu option, just above my T for typing words is a plus sign, which gives me my cursor and allows me to grab something I typed before by clicking on it, and it illuminates it. It gives me the borders.
yeah, that's not happening for me. Got the cursor. Oh, says interesting tool I've never used before.
If this is the person with the staff only available part-time with the W, I can read that if that's you asking the question.
No, it was me, the well-trained, passionate team.
Oh, okay. And that's a
Um,
strength. Yep.
Yeah, I was just trying to
So
move
that's
it.
fine.
But can't
That's
move
fine.
it.
Yeah, it's enough to the left that I'll grab it in the correct column. So let's take about 2 more minutes, and we should be good.
There's some really good things in the chat too.
Yes. Okay. All right, so let's come back together. You can continue to add. I'm just going to go through some of these. Let's see, I'm going to start with the chat. We have a strength of aligning visions across programs within the organizational structure, reducing silos, which is fantastic. An opportunity, diversifying workforce and board to reflect communities served, definitely. Dedicating strength, dedicated team, a great board, and strong fund development. There's a weakness of growth has led to less documentation than would be ideal of quality standards, okay? An opportunity, more chances to raise funds and hire more staff to do more good work. And then a threat, the cooling economy. Multiple new boards, so there's a lack of knowledge and continuity at this time, which is a weakness. And okay, Melissa, yeah, committed team, that's coming through, but from a couple of folks, the common thread of a strength, which is fantastic. A weakness, less communication from the board. Fundraising, on fundraising, always the number one, I guess, pain point with the board, with all the clients that I work with, is that fundraising area. Opportunities, applying for grants, and a threat or grants not guaranteed, so you need to have a plan B. Absolutely. A lot of times those grants are seed funding, foundation grants, that is, are seed funding, but a lot of times they're one time. So you're constantly in that mode of, you know, re-earning what you need every single year. I mean, that's the nature of a nonprofit. And that's one of the kind of pluses of the federal funding is, for the most part, you've been getting it, you know, each time, or you have it for a fixed extended period of time. And so you're kind of good for those few years, but it's at the whim of Congress, so you never know. So let's look at some of these on the board here. A weakness, the board turns over and involvement is only as strong as its chair. Yeah, we touched on that in a prior session as well. That's a common thread that I see. Needing to update curriculum. Whomever shared that one, would you like to come off mute and speak to that a little bit around updating curriculum? In what context? Is it to expand services, to reach new audiences, or to incorporate some current developments?
This is Karen. I was just thinking about our program because it started out. So I was thinking about the PTI program and that some of us have been using, you know, older curriculum that I think I'm excited to go to the Region D conference to learn how we can have AI help us develop new curriculum. And so,
Yeah, that's really a good one. That's why I wanted to hear, because curriculum and program, it sounded really rich as an area to focus on. You see, regardless of how much outreach we do, people still don't know does that exist?
Yes, exist. Yes.
Yeah, that's true too. You're doing great work and you're really impacting lives, but more people need to know about you, which comes back to that marketing piece, that branding, that outreach, leveraging your board members to help you do that, appearing at different events and activities in the community and having a booth of some kind to be able to share and let folks know, getting those LinkedIn posts out there and Facebook. So absolutely. Looking into workforce development money as an opportunity. Who shared that one? If you'd like to speak on that for us.
Yeah, that was
Karen. Karen. Okay.
And we've been strategizing how to replace some ARPA funding that we've gotten. And workforce is a huge focus. And we have pieces that I think we can sell to some of our workforce development programs about working with families and family engagement. And so we're checking into it.
Good deal. Good deal. Also wanted to come back to the weakness someone had up here about staff only available part-time. Definitely that's part of growth, I would imagine, where folks maybe come in as volunteer and then they go part-time and then hopefully they go full-time. But I could see that as limiting. Whomever wrote that, would you like to share in your agency specifically? Is it a case of still advancing to full-time, or?
I mean, that's the idea, but I think it's just we hire the parent advisors, and I think just because they have kids of their own that they're managing and kind of taking care of, that they only have a limited capacity of hours. And so it really hurts when I'm trying to schedule a program or training or resource fairs and they're like, well, I'm not available this day, or I can only do it for this hour and I can't do that. I'm like, ah! So I'm not used to that kind of environment where I don't have availability of staff every day and I'm like trying to pick and choose who's available. So it's just been, and then we like in the past have continued to hire that way. So instead of like waiting for a big chunk to hire maybe more hours, we just keep saying, oh, well, this PA can work 5 hours and we can get this one for 10 hours. And I was like, that is not ideal. So working with Michelle to kind of do away with that and see how we can make that better.
That's an excellent observation, especially as we're talking about this whole idea of opportunities and maybe even a threat. It may be stronger than a weakness. It may be a threat to the continued services and this continued level of services in terms of excellence that you may have become known for, because you're constantly dealing with that challenge. So it requires you to begin to think of things differently as you're sharing that you're doing. So that's an excellent example of how, looking at things in this way might spark a realization that, oh my goodness, this is bigger than the scheduling challenge that it currently is. It's a long-term potential, service challenge and reputational challenge. Was there something in the chat? I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye pop up and
Jill,
then
Glenda, Jill
oh,
has.
Jill, yes, that's what it was. Thank you, Jill. Go ahead. So we can see you, but
yes,
you need
yes. It's my mouse. It's just not working. So part of the Sherelle, one of the things that we have done kind of in looking at that part-time and how do you manage kind of some of that part-time pieces has, what are those programs that interact link in their program work, and how do you, so we've got staff that cross borders of programming too, so that we might have a part-time staff that then becomes a full-time staff because they can work across programs. And how do those programs link together? So if they go to a resource fair, then they have that, they represent the organization across program borders, so that then you have full-time staff versus a bunch of part-time staff, is one way we've looked at kind of making a, you know, that bigger pocket of full-time staff. I don't know that that works for all organizations, but it's really helped us kind of give our staff full-time positions, and build, but also build continuity across programming and granting, and giving staff a concept of the whole organization versus this is my program, kind of an idea.
Yeah, and we're working on that too. I think it's for ours is staff don't want to work more hours. I only want to work this amount of hours. So a shift that we're gonna have to make. So we'll do that. But yeah, that helps. We do have staff that cross all grant projects to get their full-time hours. So we do have that too.
Good deal. Good deal. Thanks for sharing. So I just responded in the chat. Someone was interested in this template. I'll share the slide deck so you have that, but also I'll share the template separately so that you have it in a usable document, like a Word document, as opposed to just a PowerPoint slide, or actually it would be a PDF when I share it. So let me clear these items off. I think I have the ability to do that as a participant. Maybe not. Let me see. Trash, clear all drawings. Yes, awesome. All right. So here are the ones we had, and I'm just going to go through them somewhat quickly because we have 5 minutes remaining. This is the last component, except for one final question I want to ask you. But some of the things we had that emanate from the project director's office, you know, the Parent Center having one OSEP source of funding. So we kind of dealt with that already with the conversation around sources of funding and revenue diversification. The board chair dictating how to manage the grant. That's part of that crossover where the board may be getting too involved, or the chair specifically in the day-to-day operation. So if you have that going on, that would be something you would want to, you know, list out on one of those columns and see how to address that from a process and procedure standpoint. Whether there's a job description, we talked about job descriptions as it related to the chief executive, but is there one for the project director? Have you taken the time to just stop and document what you really do? I mean, there may be a job description, but is it reflective of what actually occurs in your position? Is it really complete? Would it be a fair assessment if someone else was to come in and take over that position? Annual evaluation, same thing. You know, when's the last time you were evaluated? And what's that evaluation look like? Is it old school, or is it more like current evaluations where it's very ongoing and smaller meetings more frequently versus the one-time annual evaluation, more performance oriented, more positive driven, and not so punitive in its orientation. The strategic plan concept we talked about at the programmatic level. That was the foundation of today's presentation. Nonprofit management training, I mentioned that, you know, in the context of the training component. So again, just expanding that perspective around, what does the director need as he or she runs the project? And it's very similar to what the executive director needs from a more macro perspective. You need it from a more micro perspective. And how frequently are you meeting? Are you having those financial conversations with the ED and or the finance person, getting that perspective? We've established that diversification spreadsheet would be useful. So that's a good thing. So we hit almost all of these. And then in addition to the director's office, you have the staff, which we've talked about. Sherelle shared some things around that and some pain points she's encountering. But you want to consider those paid and unpaid staff that are delivering those programmatic services. Are they communicating with you on a frequent basis? Do they get training that they need that's not necessarily disability driven? But going more holistically around performance in general? Are there some leadership training courses that they're desirous of in terms of their own advancement? A lot of times that gets ignored and we just think about what do we need to deliver program and not so much what do we need to keep our people at their best and keep them interested and happy and coming to work every day because we're developing them as well. Just kind of going down the list and calling out these items, the board's role, how they interface, we kind of talked about that, and getting that financial management training or drafting policies. Someone put that on this prior screen in terms of the policies kind of having drifted away as far as being documented. So you're aware of that, and how you prioritize that is the next stage, and it's where we're ending this series, is kind of going back and reviewing all of these things you've been capturing as notes and insights for yourself to then kind of rank what do you want to zero in on at the end of this series as maybe your top 3 things to focus on. And when we look at the folks that are impacted, the injured, it's both the director because of the stresses, the frustrations, the lack of resources, the lack of people, the lack of tools, the staff retention, is there turnover? Are your staff feeling like they're equipped to do their work with what they need, which is all driven by the resources that you have? So it's both paid and volunteer staff that have that feel the effects of these things from a programmatic standpoint, and certainly the board in terms of their knowledge and awareness of the programs that you're delivering and the effectiveness of them and the outcomes that you're having. How frequently is that reported to the board? Who's reporting it to the board, and what format are they receiving it? Is it pages and pages of narrative, or is it some dashboard delivery where there's some graphics? Or do you have families coming forward and sharing their stories personally? How innovative and creative have you gotten in that way of sharing information, notwithstanding the fact that, half the board are families that have received services, 51%, but the other 49% not necessarily. So there's still that need to keep them informed and aware. So the last thing I wanted to ask is a repeat of the question from last week. I know there's been a lot of year-end things going on right now with the end of the school year, but also some reporting. And so I wanted to ask today if you all had up to 3 things from a topic perspective that you hope we would cover during this series that may or may not be on our agenda, but there's things that in this platform, it would be helpful to you if we did spend a little time talking about that particular topic, whatever it might be. So if you have a topic that's top of mind for you, you can drop it in the chat and just indicate, you don't have to indicate anything. I'll be able to discern from the nature that it's one of your top 3 topics of interest to you. And if you want to go back into annotate and drop it on the screen, you can do that as well. But that's the last item for today that I wanted to cover, just to make sure we're taking advantage of this time that we have and leveraging the opportunity to maybe dip our toe into an area that we may not have initially contemplated. But as you can see, we're covering a lot of subject areas through this approach, organically, but also intentionally in terms of strategic planning, financial diversification, board roles and responsibilities, chair responsibilities, training, and the like. So with that, I'll ask if there's any questions that anyone wants to share or verbalize as we're wrapping up, as you're typing in your topics or putting them on the screen. Is there anything anyone wants to ask or share as a takeaway from today before I turn it back over to Tony and Michelle and Angela to close us out for today?
I'll just say I see in the chat, Melissa put grant writing. So we are noting that, Melissa. And then, yeah, others, if you put it in this, or if you want to send it, like we said last time, to Tony, we are capturing it, and I would encourage you to do it, like hang up and do it. It's kind of like a survey, right? You pop it up on the screen. As I say, we pull the Miriam at Zipper, people get the surveys done. But I just wanted to highlight, Glenda, as we close too, and I love the fact that you talked about the nonprofit management side for this. Is that was really important for us as a TAC team in this grant iteration, because we do provide, you know, the technical assistance to not just PTI directors, but EDs, but really to hone in. It's not the only thing right over 5 years, but really honing in on building capacity around the full nonprofit spectrum. So a lot of the stuff you were talking about today, and growing all of us as leaders in this trajectory, because we've been really great about growing us on what the OSEP and what the PTI demands have been. I don't know how much we've really honed in, you know, solely, and I say collectively, not just Region D, to that nonprofit. So I think it's a big focus for us. So really share your ideas, because even if it's not in this series, it's something we're going to take in and make sure we're going to develop for future TA with all of you, group and one-on-one. So I'll say that, and then Nicole, you have your hand up. So.
Yeah, I know we moved past it, but I just wanted to bring it up because I do think it's a really important thing for parent centers to think about when about the hiring of parents, right? And the schedules and the availability. I think that's across the board an issue with a lot of parent centers, right? We hire parents. That is why people call us. That is why we exist, right? Because we're able to really support parents. We have that empathy and understanding that they're not going to get anywhere else. I will say people come to work for us because we are so flexible, but that doesn't mean that we're not professional, right? We are still a professional organization. So what has been very helpful for us in our organization is we set guidelines and standards of hiring. Like line staff, we do not hire anybody that can't work more than 20 to 25 hours. We prefer 30 a full-time employee, but if you cannot commit to working 20 hours or to 25 hours, you're not going to be hired. It's just the flexibility. We tell them that I know your kids are out for school, but we are open during summer. So you are required to come in during summer. So I think we set these very strict guidelines in the hiring process. We put that in our job descriptions, and we follow them. During interviews, we say, your schedule is, we will be flexible and we will work with you. However, as a manager, I set your schedule, right? And if you're needed to go to an outreach, then you're needed to go to an outreach. I say it more kindly than that, right? But I think we just hold standards of, this is a professional business and you come to work for us because of flexibility, but the standard of professionalism must stay the same. We are not the same mom and pop organizations we were 20, 30 years ago in basements, right, and in garages. So I just wanted to say, I think that is across the board is an issue. I just think it's been helpful for us to set those standards.
Indeed. Thank you. Very well said, Nicole.
All right. So we're capturing the things in the chat here. So Tony, can we write those down so we don't lose sight? Yeah, this was great. Really interactive today. I love the exercises, Glenda, getting us to really think.
Awesome.
And move forward, right? And as we said in a meeting a few hours ago, this is not an overnight thing. It's going to take some time to build, but we're doing it together, and we have a great network of support around us. So
Indeed, we do.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for all of that.
yeah,
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next session, and have a great day.
you too.
Thanks.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.